Alcaraz yes, Sinner no.
I just want people to realize.
Do you know Sinner and Alcaraz at 15 are going to be the ones?
They said the golden era of tennis ended with Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. But what if the next dynasty has already begun? Because right now, at just 22 years old, Carlos Alcaraz isn't just winning matches, he's rewriting history. He already owns multiple Grand Slam titles across different surfaces, dominating the sport with a mix of fearless power, lightning speed, and creative shot-making that feels almost impossible to stop. And then there's Jannik Sinner, the ice-cold competitor who has risen just as fast, matching Alcaraz blow for blow and proving he's no one-hit wonder. Together, they aren't just part of the conversation, they are the conversation. The question everyone is asking, could these two wipe out an entire generation of players the same way Federer and Nadal did 20 years ago? Some pundits say yes, that this rivalry will define tennis for the next decade and beyond. Others warn us not to crown them too early, reminding us that injuries, pressure, and new challengers always appear. But here's the reality. In a sport that has always searched for the next big thing, we may already be looking at the two men who will shape the future of the game. The only mystery now is not if, but how far Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner will go, and who, if anyone, can rise to stop them. When Carlos Alcaraz first stepped onto the scene as a teenager, many dismissed him as just another talented prospect. He was thin, raw, and still growing into his frame. But those who practiced with him behind closed doors saw something different, a fire, an intensity that couldn't be taught. Even at 15, players walked off the court knowing they had just hit with someone who was destined to be special. Coaches whispered, "This kid is going to be amazing." The story was similar with Jannik Sinner, though his rise was quieter, more methodical. Trained in the Italian Alps, built on discipline and focus, Sinner didn't dazzle with flash at first, but with relentless consistency and an almost machine-like ability to improve year after year. Both of them represent two sides of the same coin. Alcaraz, the explosive showman who electrifies crowds with impossible shots, and Sinner, the cool assassin who dismantles opponents with precision. And as soon as they entered the big stage, the comparison to Federer and Nadal was unavoidable. Two young stars, one fiery and spectacular, the other calm and clinical, meeting again and again in the biggest arenas. Already, fans and analysts are asking if this rivalry is about to define an entire generation of tennis. Because, make no mistake, these aren't just two young players chasing titles. They are already dominating, already feared, already giving veterans flashbacks to when Federer and Nadal first made the world believe tennis could be ruled by just two men. The numbers already prove just how far ahead Carlos Alcaraz is at such a young age. At only 22, he's captured 6 Grand Slam titles across 3 different surfaces, a pace that no one in the history of the sport has ever matched. Since his breakthrough at the 2022 US Open, he has practically averaged 1 major for every 2 he's entered. That is a rhythm reserved for legends. When you line him up against history, the comparison is shocking. Federer didn't have this many by 22, Nadal didn't either. Not even Djokovic. Every time Carlos steps onto the court, he carries the weight of possibility that we might be watching the birth of the next greatest of all time. But numbers don't tell the whole story. What makes him different is the way he plays. He doesn't just beat opponents, he dismantles them with fearless creativity. His speed to the net, his willingness to take risks, his ability to turn defense into instant offense, it's as if he's playing a different video game than everyone else. And yet, just when people start calling him unbeatable, Jannik Sinner arrives to remind the world that there's another force just as dangerous. Cool under pressure, with a heavy baseline game and relentless accuracy, Sinner has already stolen multiple big finals from Alcaraz. Together, they're creating a balance, a rivalry where one pushes the other to new heights, exactly like Nadal and Federer did when their own journeys began. That's why fans are beginning to wonder, is this the start of tennis's next true golden era? What's most fascinating about this rivalry is how quickly Alcaraz and Sinner have separated themselves from the rest of the field. Just look at the recent Grand Slams. Almost every final seems to come down to these two. Carlos storming through the draw without dropping a set until the final, Jannik cruising past opponents like it's a practice session, and suddenly it feels like the rest of the ATP is simply playing catch-up. Veterans who once believed they could outlast the young guns are now admitting privately that these two might be untouchable. It's eerily similar to when Federer and Nadal first started stacking trophies in the mid-2000 seconds. Back then, the locker room atmosphere changed. Players felt like no matter how hard they trained, those two were on a different level. Today, it's Alcaraz and Sinner who inspire that same mix of awe and frustration. The pace, the consistency, the mental toughness, the physical endurance, they're not just ahead, they're redefining what the standard, even island, and the ripple effect is already showing. Young players stepping onto the tour now don't just dream of winning a title, they're forced to measure themselves against two men who already seem to be writing history. That psychological gap alone is devastating, because once your rivals start believing you're unbeatable, the battle is already half won. And right now, most of the tour looks at Carlos and Jannik and quietly admits, these guys are on a different planet. But let's not forget, even the greatest dynasties face challengers. For every Federer and Nadal, there was a Novak Djokovic waiting in the shadows, someone who refused to believe they were unbeatable. And that's the big question hanging over this new era. Who will be the one to disrupt Alcaraz and Sinner? Because history tells us there's always a third force, the player brave enough to stare down the so-called impossible and say, I'm going to break through. Right now, though, no one has truly stepped up. Stefanos Tsitsipas had his moment but couldn't sustain it. Daniil Medvedev still has the game, but hasn't found that extra gear against the young giants. Even Alexander Zverev, once tipped to dominate, has been overshadowed by their rise. The truth is, Carlos and Jannik aren't just winning, they're demoralizing. Every time a veteran believes he has a chance, one of these two slams the door shut. It creates the same atmosphere the Big Three built. Everyone else battling for scraps while the chosen ones carve up the history books. The difference now is the speed. Federer and Nadal took a few years to lock the sport down. Alcaraz and Sinner did it almost instantly in their early 20s. The urgency is terrifying, because if no new challenger emerges soon, we may be staring at a decade where two names dominate nearly every final. The stage is set, the script is already being written, and unless someone unexpected rises, tennis might belong entirely to Alcaraz and Sinner. What makes this rivalry so captivating is not just the titles they've won, but how different their paths and personalities are. Carlos Alcaraz is pure energy smiling on court, fist pumping after every winner, playing with a joy that reminds fans of a young Rafael Nadal. His creativity feels limitless, mixing drop shots, blistering forehands, fearless net rushes, and impossible defensive gets into a style that looks more like art than strategy. He thrives on chaos, turning broken points into highlights, leaving opponents shaking their heads. Jannik Sinner, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. Ice runs through his veins. Rarely showing emotion, rarely letting nerves get to him, he embodies discipline and focus. He plays a brand of tennis built on clean, devastating ground strokes and machine-like consistency. If Alcaraz is the artist, Sinner is the engineer, precise, efficient, unrelenting. And yet, when they collide, their differences create something electric. Fans know they're about to see fire meet ice, speed clash with patience, explosiveness tested against structure. Every rally becomes a study in contrast. Every set feels like a chess match and a fist fight rolled into one. And just like Federer and Nadal once did, they're pushing each other into greatness. Without Sinner, Alcaraz might run away with the sport. Without Alcaraz, Sinner might not sharpen his game to its sharpest edge. Together, they are shaping a rivalry that feels destined to define this era of tennis. The question everyone is starting to ask now isn't just about who wins the next major, but who will complete the career Grand Slam first. For Alcaraz, the missing piece is Australia, a tournament where he hasn't yet cracked the code. Despite his dominance everywhere else, Melbourne has remained stubbornly out of reach, with Novak Djokovic and Daniil Medvedev standing in his way in recent years. But with the way his game translates to hard courts, the speed, the aggression, the ability to turn defense into attack in a single shot, many believe it's only a matter of time before he lifts that trophy. For Sinner, the mountain is Roland Garros. Clay has never been his natural surface. but his steady improvement and growing strength mean it can't be ruled out. The comparisons to Nadal make this storyline even more compelling. Could Jannik become the first Italian man since Adriano Panatta to win in Paris? What makes it so intriguing is that both of them are close, both of them are within striking distance, and whichever one gets there first will have a major psychological edge in the rivalry. Because completing the career slam isn't just about numbers, it's about status. It signals to the tennis world that you're not just a champion. You're the kind of player who can master every surface, every condition, every stage. And right now, Alcaraz and Sinner are on the edge of achieving that historic mark. What truly sets this new era apart is the fear factor creeping through the locker room. Players aren't just losing to Alcaraz and Sinner, they're walking onto the court already knowing the odds are stacked against them. Veterans who once carried confidence now admit privately that it feels like deja vu from the early 2000 seconds when Federer and Nadal first tightened their grip on the sport. Back then, the belief was gone before the first ball was struck. Now, the same whispers are circling around Carlos and Jannik. Opponents talk about their insane physical preparation, their ability to recover between matches, their mental edge that makes them thrive under pressure. The psychological warfare is almost more important than the tennis itself. Once players start thinking two men are unbeatable, they become unbeatable at least until someone refuses to buy into the myth. Remember, Novak Djokovic once declared he would not only challenge but surpass Federer and Nadal. And at the time, everyone laughed. Yet, he did it. The ATP Tour is waiting for that next fearless disruptor, someone bold enough to say out loud that Alcaraz and Sinner can be beaten. But until that voice emerges, the aura of invincibility grows stronger with every match. And that's the danger because in tennis, confidence spreads, but so does fear. Right now, the fear belongs to everyone except Carlos and Jannik. Looking ahead, it's almost impossible not to imagine the next 10 to 15 years being defined by these two names. Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner aren't just rising stars anymore, they are already the standard, the measuring stick for every young player who dreams of breaking through. At just 22, Carlos has 6 majors and counting. At 23, Jannik has already proven he can win on the biggest stages, taking down legends and silencing doubters. If you project their careers forward with the pace they're on, the numbers get frightening. Alcaraz winning 2 slams a year would shatter every record in the books. Sinner, staying this consistent, could cement him as one of the most reliable champions in history. And yet, what makes it even more exciting is how they're pushing each other higher, faster, harder than anyone thought possible. Without Sinner, Alcaraz might get complacent. Without Alcaraz, Sinner might not find the extra edge. Together, they're creating an arms race of greatness, exactly like Federer and Nadal did when they forced each other into new levels of brilliance. The fans know it, the analysts know it, even their opponents know it. This rivalry isn't temporary. It's the beginning of a dynasty, a clash of two forces that may dominate tennis for more than a decade. The only question left is simple: who will end up on top when history finally writes its verdict? So where does all of this leave us? With a rivalry that is not just about today, but about the future of tennis itself. Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner are still only in their early 20s, yet they've already built resumes that most players would dream of achieving in an entire career. They're rewriting the record books, dominating finals, and forcing every other player on tour to raise their game just to survive. Fans who once feared the sport would sink into mediocrity after Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic now find themselves witnessing something just as thrilling, maybe even greater. The sport has been handed not one, but 2 champions who can define an era. But beyond the numbers, beyond the trophies, what makes this story so irresistible is the uncertainty. Will Alcaraz's raw power and creativity carry him to the all-time record? Will Sinner's icy precision prove too consistent to overcome? Or will a new challenger rise from the shadows, just as Djokovic once did, to shake everything we think we know? That's the beauty of this moment. We're watching the future unfold in real time, and every match feels like another chapter in a history book being written before our eyes. One thing is clear: tennis doesn't just have its next stars, it has its next legends. And the battle between Alcaraz and Sinner is only just beginning.